this week, what I want to talk about, let's read this text first. Let's read Ephesians 4, 22 through 24, just to kind of jog your memory on where we're at. I call this the arc text. This is the key thing that we're looking at here in this whole entire study. He says, to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life, and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. All right, so the idea is that he's talking about that there's some context here that you might want to read later, but that's the idea. That's his directive, is to put off our old self, which belongs to our former manner of life, and is corrupt through what kind of desires? Deceitful desires. I want to keep repeating that to you and letting you understand that sometimes what we desire isn't real or isn't good for us. Now, maybe there's a part of it that is good for us, but the way that we act it out isn't really that great for us, right? And so deceitful desires, our desires will lie to us sometimes, and we need to renew our minds because let's face it, sin isn't born when we just start doing stuff wrong, right? Where does sin start? It starts in the mind. Oh, that cookie looks real good, right? Oh, he's kind of handsome, right? That's not me talking, right? We're not going to go anywhere with that. They're born in the mind. So old habits, old ways of thinking, evil things have to come off so that we can put something on that's new, that's truthful, that is holy. Because the goal of the church is to be a holy, set-apart people. We're not here to be a social club. We're not here to be an all-inclusive charity kind of a situation. I want to tell you, I get a call at least once a week now for the last about 6 weeks, right? We've gotten a call from somebody in the area that needs money. All right? Do you really think that they need money? They don't. We had one person call us 3 times with 3 different names. Same phone number. Thank goodness for caller ID, right? Yeah. And we also have organizations. Love Inc. is a wonderful organization that lets us know about people that are not working for what they want. They're scamming people for money, and churches are a great target because we're supposed to be the most compassionate people in the world. And unfortunately, there are people that take advantage of that. So we have to be wise to that. We have to understand how to handle those things. We need to put off the old way of life, and we need to put something on. We're to be a holy, set-apart people. Sometimes that means boundaries, and we don't give. Sometimes that's what that means. You don't hear that said at church very often. Sometimes that means that we don't help, because people need to grow up, right? And so sometimes you got to do that. And that is difficult for me especially to do sometimes. But we've got to move along. So we've talked about lying. We've talked about anger. Today, I want to talk about theft. How many of you are just blatant robbers in here? All right? You steal from the bank. You steal from Walmart, right? Steal from the church as the things go by, right? Just a 20. Oh, goodness. Yeah, I mean, this was a difficult thing. Like, we know not to steal, right? We know not to steal things. How many of you have ever stolen something, though? Yeah, I've stolen from the church. Let me give you that story real quick because most of you know it, but there are a few people in here that have been new since I've told the story last. When I was a kid, 6 years old-ish, I don't really remember. I was young. The church was raising money. 16? Did somebody say 16? So, I was trying to think of a comeback, but my brain's not working right today. So, in next week's message, I can't do that. Next week, we're talking about unwholesome talk, so I can't. You guys are like, oh no. But anyway, when I was about 6 years old, give or take a couple of years, we were at church. My parents have been involved in the church ministry. My mom's been on staff in church for 22 years. 26 years. Whoa, I was off by 4. But she's been involved in church ministry for that long, paid staff. So she had an office at the church, and they were up practicing one night for worship team practice on a Wednesday night. It would usually happen after Bible study would happen on Wednesday nights. And me and my sister were little brats. We couldn't keep babysitters very well. No, I'm kidding. That was a lie. At least I admit it. No, they would bring us up to church. We would have kids Bible study and stuff, and then we would just stay there while they were practicing for worship. And so we're curious kids, right, and everything like that. And during this time in the church life, we were raising money for a pool for Wolverine Christian Service Camp. And who my grandfather used to be was I think maintenance at that time, right? You weren't the director at that time, you were maintenance, but he was a director, moved down to maintenance and did some of that stuff. And so they were raising money for a pool. The church was helping them out, and it was great, except for there was a gigantic bucket of change underneath my mom's desk, and before, this was in the era of the original Nintendo and Sega Genesis. They were just starting to come out. And the arcades were still fairly popular, right? And my dad had rewarded me for getting good grades or something like that by taking me to the arcade one night, and we were hanging out and stuff. So quarters were gold, right? Because that's what you need to play arcade games. And if you had more quarters when you go to the arcade, you could play a lot more games, all right? So they're practicing on stage. Her office is directly across from the stage. So it'd be like I'm looking at the sound room. Basically, that was where her office was located in the room. And I, on my hands and knees, crawled behind the chairs into her office underneath her desk, and I'm just sitting there looking at this thing glowing at me and just like, right? And so I begin to pick out the quarters and shove them in my pocket, right? And how my parents didn't hear me cha-ching, cha-ching out of the door, I don't really know. But I went home, put them in my Barney bank, right? And was safekeeping for when we go into the arcade next time. I don't exactly know how they found the quarters, but they found the quarters. And so the rest of the story goes is they confronted me, obviously. Where did you get all this money? You don't have a job. You're 6 years old, right? And I said, Grandpa gave them to me. I didn't specify which grandpa, so I had an out either way, right? Now, I don't think I was that smart, but I'm thinking about, what possibilities could be. But had it been my grandpa Soupy, he was the director of the camp. So the guy that I just kind of stole from, not just Jesus, I stole from the camp that he was working at, right? I just threw him under the bus, say he gave me the money, right? There's some pretty neat logic going on. But anyway, they figured it out that I didn't do that, and I got grounded 1 week for stealing and 1 week for lying about stealing, and then I had to go apologize to our minister, who was an intimidating man all by himself. So learned my lesson pretty quickly. So I stole from the church when I was 6 years old, and that's my claim to fame. And that's when I found Jesus. So I'm kidding. So anyway, you might have a story like that. There's different times in our lives when we're tempted to steal, right? There are different things that we want, certain circumstances that we run up into that are difficult. And so in writing this message today, I'm like, man, how do I make this relevant for everybody? And so I kind of want to bring a couple of different things into this to hopefully help you understand why stealing is such a big deal, not just because it's theft of personal property. Why is God so adamant that we do not steal? Why did he include stealing in the Ten Commandments, right? I mean, we have serious offenses in the Ten Commandments. Do not have any other idols before me. Do not commit adultery. Like, these are things that morally are huge. But when somebody steals from a store, like, a lot of times it's just a slap on the wrist, right? You don't really hear a lot of people, unless it's like millions of dollars of embezzlement, you don't really hear of a big case of stealing. It's not a big deal in our society today. So I want to bring that in on this. So we're going to talk about stealing, and we're going to be putting on work and generosity. We're putting off theft, and we're putting on work and generosity. So let's read this text. It's Ephesians 4:28. It says, "Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need." So the action that we automatically associate with the word steal is what? Taking, robbery, right? What are we typically taking when we talk about stealing? What are we taking? Money, okay? When I was a kid, I'd walk by the grapes in the store, and I'd want to take a grape. Not because I really enjoyed grapes, but just because it was there for the taking, and I could probably get away from it, get away with it, right? Oh, I'll just taste this thing and see if I want to buy these, right? Yeah, that doesn't work. So you think about these kinds of things. You may or may not have held up a bank before, but all of us have had at least the temptation of stealing, right? Has anybody never felt that temptation to steal something? Okay. We felt that before, right? I don't want to ask you to publicly admit anything, but I want you to be aware that as we're talking about this, you can't get change unless you admit to something. You understand that? If you can't admit to the reality of something, you're never going to change. And so some of these things we're going to talk about today we're going to look at that, we're going to raise our eyebrow like it's not that big of a deal. But if it's theft, it is a big deal, right? If it's stealing, if God considers it stealing, it would be considered what? Sin. And the wages of sin is death. So that's a problem, right? Like that's a big deal. So when we talk about some of these things, like some of these things are socially acceptable today. When I started looking at the list and what could be considered as stealing, I'm like, man, this seems a little extreme. But the fact is if you boil it down to taking something else from somebody, or it doesn't have to be concrete, it's still theft. It's still theft. And so this is interesting. So did you know that we have to pay a license for the worship songs that we play on Sunday morning? Do you guys know that here? Okay. So like when we play this live, just because we're here, we have to pay somebody, what is it, $140 a year or something like that? $200. Okay, the price went up. We have to pay $200 a year so that we can perform these songs. Otherwise, we have to write all of our own material or do public domain stuff. All right? Why? Somebody else did it. They wrote it. They put the work into it, right? That's okay to think about, right? To give them money for something that they've created that we can, use to benefit one another, right? That's a way to make money. When we show video clips from actual movies, we have to pay a license. The church has to pay a license to do those kinds of things. If we wanted to, that's why we never record the worship portion and put that on the internet for you guys to watch later. We always just record the sermon because that takes another license to be able to reproduce it and send it out into the world like that. Isn't that crazy? And there's a lot of churches that don't do that. When we show movies here on, like when we showed War Room last year, and then we showed The Insanity of God here not too long ago, The Passion of the Christ, $100. We got to pay $100, and it's only good for a year. We can only show it for a year. Isn't that crazy? You could just go to the store and buy a DVD and plug it in your computer, and we'd be good to go, right? But it's not ethical. To show it as a public viewing and advertise it, that's not ethical. We would be stealing from somebody if we didn't abide by the copyright laws that exist in our world today. Like I said, it seems a bit extreme. So it stinks. Usually when we have to work for something, it kind of stinks, right? Right? I mean, let's be honest. Like there is a benefit to having worked for something and seeing the fruit of your labor, right? Absolutely. But the whole drum, getting up every day, going to work, having to, we were talking, Ken yesterday was saying he had to be at work at 5 a.m. yesterday, and it was just like, oh, I don't envy you, buddy, and that's tough stuff. But we got to work. We got to do some of these things. And sometimes we just don't enjoy the work. We don't enjoy having to go do something. We don't enjoy the labor that we have to put forth to see fruit from that. But that's the way that it works, right? Isn't that what you tell people? Like, I don't want to work. That's life, right? That's the way it is. Like, deal with it because everybody else has got to work for a living. And just because I disagree with it doesn't necessarily mean I have the right to change it, right? So I want to take you back to the Garden of Eden to explain this a little bit better. Eden was a place of freedom, complete freedom, Right? The Garden of Eden was an incredible place. Nobody owned anything. Right? Adam and Eve didn't like set up their plot lines, and they didn't have like, well, this is my side of the garden. Right? You can have that tree and I'll have this tree. Right? It didn't happen like that. It was a free place. Nobody owned anything. There were fruit trees. I'm sure that there were vegetables. Honestly, there were probably delicious things that we've never tasted before because they only have ever existed in the Garden of Eden. You ever thought about that? Like, God didn't detail what existed there, but he closed it off, shut it down. For what we know, it's pretty much a desert now. So there could have been things that have gone extinct since then. And there might be really delicious, healthy, chocolate-tasting fruits, right? They're gone. All gone, right? Maybe not all gone. But the fact is that there might have been some delicious things that were there to sustain people, and they were great, and they were delicious, and they had all the access to it. It was completely free. They still had to work. All right? Understand that Adam and Eve still had work to do in the garden. That is not a consequence of sin, but that they had a freedom there. And God's rule was this: the one thing that they couldn't do. This whole space is yours to live in, he says, yours to explore. You can eat anything that you see in this garden, except this tree. Pretend it's a tree. So they can go around, they can eat from any tree. But just like when I was a kid in the store, I don't really care for grapes. Like, I get a hankering for them every once in a while, but I can't have that. So, like a tractor beam, right? It draws us in, like, oh, well, I wonder what it tastes like. I wonder if something is being held back from me, right? I'll just, oh, it kind of smells good, right? It looks delicious. You know how the story goes, most of you probably. What happens? Oh, that's so good, right? It was good to eat. It was delicious to eat. But God said, his rule was that. He said, don't eat from that one. He said, that one's mine. Have anything else. Have from the abundance of the garden. But don't eat from this one. I don't want you to eat from this one. Not because it was poisonous, like Snow White, right? Not because it was unhealthy. Not because it tasted bad. Not because of any other thing, but that God said, don't do it. That's mine. Everything in this world is mine, and I'm sharing everything with you except for that. Do you have those rules in your home? Do you have those unspoken rules in your home? That chocolate in the cupboard is mine. You want a piece? You ask. My house, it's Pepsi. That 2-liter in the fridge is mine. The kids know to ask before they take some, right? We have sometimes, do you have a chair that's yours? That is my chair, don't touch it, right? Or if I'm home, you don't sit in it, right? It's not that hard to comprehend. God said, that's mine, don't touch. And they touched. Bad problems happen, right? We know the story. Eve picks the fruit. She sees that it's good to eat. She takes a bite of the fruit. God says that it was not hers to eat, effectively making her first sin in part, what? Theft. That was not hers to take from, and she took from it. The first sin in part was stealing something from God. That's a problem. And that's a different take on it, right? It's disobedience to God, absolutely. God said don't, she did. But she took something from God. She took what was not hers to take. And so Adam comes by and is like, dude, you ate it? Give me a taste, you know? And it's great, try it, okay. Oh man, we're naked. You know, that's kind of how the story goes. I don't know how they communicated, but or if they were surfer people, or I don't know. But God's response to this sin changes the way how the world works, right? And so in talking to Adam, here's God's response. I'll put it on the screen for you. This is in Genesis 3:17 and through 19. And see, God says to Adam, because you have listened to the voice of your wife, I love that, and have eaten of the tree. No, not because of that reason. Come on now. Not everything I say is negative. Come on. Because you listen to the voice of your wife and you have eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. And in essence, what God is saying is work is going to be painful for you now. Where things didn't work against you, they're going to work against you now. Work is going to be tiring for you now. Work is going to be a struggle for you now. You're not going to enjoy what you do necessarily all the time. This is going to be a struggle for you. Work is not the curse of sin. The curse of sin is a curse on creation. Do you see that? It's a curse on the ground. It brought forth thorns and thistles. I wonder if Moses forgot to write down in this, mosquitoes were included in that or something. You know what I mean? The curse isn't work itself. The curse is that it's going to be painful and tiresome, and it's going to make us sweat, and it's not something we'll do and enjoy all the time. So think about it like this. When we steal, we're trying to get around God's discipline of sin. Do you see that? When we steal, we're trying to get around the curse. God says, now you're going to have to work to eat. You're going to eat of the plants of the field. You're going to eat of the ground. And it's going to work against you. But in order for you to live, you're going to have to earn your keep. When we try to steal something, what we're saying is, I don't want to work for that. I don't want to have to be subject to this curse. So, in essence, God's intention for us as sinners is that we would understand the weight of our sin. All right? That we would understand the reasons why, or maybe begin to see things a little bit differently than what we see them now. Right? There was a monumental mind shift from when you were a teenager to where you are now, right? Rules that didn't make sense when you were young now make perfect sense, and you enact them on people, right? So sometimes struggle and pain and different experience brings enlightenment to our minds, and we begin to understand things. For instance, Kim and I, a while back, took Sam's cell phone away from him, okay? The intention was that he would feel the pain of having something good taken away due to behaviors that were not acceptable in our household, all right? The next day, the kid comes home with another cell phone from a friend that said, I'm not using this one right now. You can use it until your parents give you yours back. Smart kid, you know? But that wasn't the point. It wasn't that we want your phone back because we want to use it, right? The point was that he would feel the weight of a consequence, something being stripped away, so that he would learn, so that he would grow, so that he would become more mature. And so God didn't curse the ground so that we would get more innovative. Does that make sense? Like, God didn't curse the ground so that we could take advantage of one another and make a buck off of somebody else's problem. God didn't curse the ground so that we could sit back and be like, well, the government's going to take care of me anyway. You know? God didn't curse the ground because of got an inheritance coming. God cursed the ground because he said, you're a sinner, you're not thinking straight, you need to see some things differently, and you're only going to learn it through pain and suffering. Oh, that's a great message, right? Welcome to church. But it's true, isn't it? God cursed the ground to teach us, to shape us. Part of it was to make it painful. We don't discipline kids so they'd be like, oh, thanks, Mom and Dad, right? It hurts. He cursed the ground to teach us, to shape us. And pain and suffering teaches us. It grows us. Tim Keller, an author of Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering, he's also a pastor. He said, there is a purpose to suffering. And if faced rightly, it can drive us like a nail deep into the love of God and into more stability and spiritual power than you can imagine. To me, that's an incredible quote. It's not God, so I hope it's really true, you know? Theft is a way of avoiding a curse. So Paul says, thieves, take off your habit of stealing. Don't do it anymore because it's stinky. It doesn't look good on you, Christian. It's not supposed to be on you, Christian. You need to take that off. And so I want to ask you, what ways do we steal today? Think about that. We steal sometimes, I mean, not you personally necessarily, but we hear of embezzlement, right? Stealing of money. We hear of robberies taking place. Okay, so that's the easy one. What other ways do we steal? Steal happiness. That's good. I'll give you the list that I have here. Identity theft. That's a big one, right? Any of that happened to you guys in here? Anybody? A couple of you? Yep. That stinks. Like, that is not fun. That's painful because you got to go through a whole lot of rigmarole to get things taken care of. Okay, so not giving what belongs to someone else is theft. All right, I worked at a retail job when I was a teenager. I worked long week during Christmas. Christmas is always the busiest time of the year for us. And worked over 40 hours that week, all right, which means overtime, right? And then happened to be the last day of that week, landed on Christmas Eve. And my boss and supervisor both didn't want to be at work on Christmas Eve. Go figure. So I was the little guy on the totem pole. I got to work on Christmas Eve. And I asked my supervisor, I said, I will be getting some sort of overtime or holiday pay, right? Because I'd never worked. I mean, it was a retail job. I was in school, but I was off school that week, so I got to work a lot. And she was like, it's no question, over 40 hours. So I worked Christmas Eve. It wasn't my favorite day of the year, to work, but it is what it is. You got to do what you got to do. So worked. I can't remember how many hours it was, but it was well over 40. And I got my paycheck the next week, and I got paid for all the hours that I worked, but I had no overtime pay on my check. And I went up to her afterward. I said, I asked you if I would get paid extra for working over, especially being kind of a holiday. I mean, you don't have to offer holiday pay on Christmas Eve, I guess, but it stunk, And she said, well, we don't offer overtime pay. And I went, that's against the law. And she just kind of shrugged her shoulders and said, that's what I've been told. And I let it go because I needed the job, and I was just a entry-level thing. But I was angry. I wasn't given something that I was owed. I put the time in. I put the extra time in, right? And I wasn't given what I was owed. He didn't take nothing out of my pocket. I didn't have money in the bank that he just took away from me, but that was theft. That was theft, all right? That was something that was stolen from me. Not giving what belongs to someone else is theft. So think taxes, all right? The Bible says, I know that that's a touchy issue in some circles, but the Bible says, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's. The law of the land is that we have to pay taxes. I'm sorry. Yes, it stinks at that time of year, but we got to do it. That's what God says. Not because the president said so, not because Congress says so, not because the state said so, but because God said, pay them what they are due. We can think offerings. Let that one just sit there for a second, right? I mean, the question, when you talk about offering, yes, we give out of a grateful heart and everything, but we should really be practicing generosity, and we're going to talk about this in a second, is that if we're trying to find ways, like there's a big argument, I did a little research on this week, and I don't want to hang here for too long, but I did some research this week, and there are people that are all across the spectrum from you shouldn't give the church any money because God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, to all the way that you should give a tithe plus X amount of number of years, and all. They got formulas for how this all works in the Bible. It's all across the spectrum, all right? The basic principle is if you're trying to figure out how to give less to God, how you're trying to get more for yourself, you're in dangerous territory, right? The fact is I don't really care about 10%. I think that's a great baseline. I think that that's something that we should all be aiming for, right? Your budget may not be in line today to give 10%, but it's work to get there, isn't it? You actually got to pay attention to what you're spending on. And kind of one of the things that I help gauge is, if I'm spending more on fast food throughout the month than I am on my monthly tithes, you know what I mean? You get that idea? If I'm spending more on cable and internet than I am on giving to God, that could be a problem. If I'm spending more on cell phones than I am giving to God over the course of a month, God said, give to him, give him with a grateful heart. If you want to apply the Old Testament, I'll let you interpret that for yourself. For me, that's a great principle. If you want to start out and work your way up to 10% and do that, that's a great place to start, of giving God your first fruits, not what you got left over in your pocket after you spend it all on yourself. Notice the offering plate's already gone by, so I'm not trying to guilt trip you. All right? Just think about it. You might be stealing from God. He's asked of you to give to him something, and I'm sorry, but giving of my time when I'm not getting my budget in line doesn't cut it. That's kind of like when we were kids, Mom would leave us a chore list during the summer, right? And we would do 3/4 of the list. What would she come home and say? Why didn't you get these things done? I got everything else done, right? Don't you see what we did? But it didn't complete the list, right? Sometimes we're well, it'll be okay. God's asked us of this. We need to rise to the occasion and get to that place. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it takes work to get there. So I'll leave that there. Negligence is a form of stealing. I forgot to give you that back. Sometimes we legit forget, but that can be a form of stealing. That great deal you're getting on something might actually be a form of theft. You go to a garage sale and you see something that has value, and it's marked for $5 or something, and you're like, man, that's a steal. We use the word in it. You know what I mean? If that's a steal, we need to make sure that they know that it has value to it. If they say, I don't really care, you take it, do what you want, then you are free and clear. But ask the question. Don't be that thing's worth $5,000 and it's only marked at $5. You know what I mean? That's a problem. That's a form of theft. Again, if they say take it and make money. Do it, But have their blessing in that. Taking advantage of ignorance isn't necessarily a good thing. Plagiarism is theft, right? Taking someone's words and using them as your own is theft. Taking credit for an idea, for work done, for whatever, that's stealing. That's theft. Demanding your own way. Oh. Did anybody just drop their head? Demanding our own way out of selfishness is a form of stealing other people's freedoms. It's my freedom, it's my way. But what about everybody else's? Being late, you're stealing other people's time. Watching movies, listening to music, or using software that you didn't pay for, that's theft. Participated in that for a while, right? I'll admit that. Destroying someone else's reputation. You're stealing from them. You're stealing their reputation. Let them do it to themselves if they're that bad. Not paying for the services of other people. That's theft, right? That's theft. Humiliating, bullying, degrading others. That's stealing their dignity. Right? And we could go on, but I wanted to make it very clear that there are ways that we steal that don't involve concrete taking of something. There are ways that we take from others that don't involve necessarily personal possessions. There is theft in a lot of different ways. Some of the ways that of theft that we're going to fight against in our own mind, right? Well, they deserved that. They probably did, all right? But God said, vengeance is mine, not ours. Let him take care of that. Let him move in and do that. So some of the ways we're gonna fight against it, we're not going to want to change, right? If you have music at home that you have not paid for, you got to delete it. You got to get rid of it. Like I downloaded a lot of stuff when that first started working on, because I'm a computer guy and I like music, obviously. So I'm going to put the number right around 5,000 songs that I downloaded, had in my library. I don't use that anymore because that was all stolen music. For a while, when Netflix was sending out DVDs, how many of you have ever used a Netflix account before? Oh my goodness. Netflix is a cool service that you use to get movies. They used to have a DVD thing where you could mail order things. Instead of going to Blockbuster, which is why Blockbuster is bankrupt now, you could just set up a list on the internet. They'd send you a DVD. When you're done with that one, you send it back in the mail, and they send you the next one that's on your list. And it just kept going back and forth, and it was awesome. I used to set up my queue. I would get the DVD, put it in my computer, rip it off the DVD, send it back, get the next one, rip it off the DVD, send it back. I probably did that with 100 different movies. Flat out stole them. I didn't pay for the license to have those. They're gone now. Right? Can't do that. Can't do those kinds of things. We're not going to want to change. Do you know how painful it was to delete those movies? But they're mine. I can watch what I can binge watch on my own time. I don't even need the internet. Can't do that. Stealing is stealing. It doesn't yield a blessing from God. So it destroys our God talk. Have you ever thought about that? This is something I haven't brought up in the series yet. But when we keep on the old stuff and we go out on the streets and we're like, oh, Jesus is amazing. You should come to my church because they just have awesome music and the pastor is funny sometimes. And he yells at us, which I don't really like very much. But you go talk to people about the church, about Jesus, about doing all those things, and then they see you on the side compromising in just little ways. You know what that does to our integrity as Christians? It makes it stink. We have to take off the old and put on the new. And so it destroys our God talk. You can tell people all about your church. You can tell people all about that God is the answer to their problems, but clearly you don't trust him enough to provide for you when you steal. You see that? You don't trust him enough to take care of you. You're taking advantage of the systems. You're doing some of these things too. And so here's why this is a problem. Your witness is flat out destroyed when you participate in these things, especially theft. Stealing communicates to the world around us that I serve happiness. Stealing communicates that I serve happiness. My greatest desire in life when I steal is my personal happiness. I want what I want, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get it. If I steal money, I'm thinking about what I can do with that money. If I steal credit, I'm going to advance my reputation in the eyes of others. If I steal words, I'm going to sound more intelligent than what I really am. Or maybe I'm really that intelligent, I just didn't want to put the work into it. If I steal reputation or dignity, I'm building my own. It's about me. It's about my feelings. It's about my image. It's about my enjoyment. It is incredibly self-centered when we start walking into theft and stealing. But my life then isn't about God. The vision then is not Jesus. I'm not listening to him. I'm trying to find ways around his discipline because I want more blessings and I'm not willing to work for them. Ephesians 4:28 says, let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor doing honest work with his own hands. Paul says, take off stealing, whatever form that it takes, and put on work, good, honest, hard work. We take pride in our work, don't we? I think we should. We fix something, we create something, we help someone, we're proud of what we do. I believe that God's kind of ingrained that in us a little bit. I mean, think about the ways that God has worked. And we worship him for that. God works all things together for our good, right? We're excited about that, right? But God works. He's not just playing games. He works all things together for our good. It's a part of who we are. It's a part of what we care about. It's one of the first things we ask about when we're meeting somebody new, right? What do you do for a living? Where do you work? What's your trade? Right? That's something that's interesting about people, and they have knowledge to share, and it's interesting to talk about. Work is a great thing. Work isn't the curse. It wasn't the punishment. The fact that it's tiresome and painful is the curse. So work is something that God himself has demonstrated in different ways. I just want to point this out real quick. Look at the creation of our world. On the seventh day, God did what? He rested. What do you rest from? You don't rest from rest, right? Unless you went on vacation. And then you need to sleep because you traveled too much, right? But you don't rest from work. So for 7 days, for 6 days, God created the world. It must have been work. And so then God rested. He took a break. Okay? God went to work creating. Jesus was a worker. Do you know how he was a worker? Carpenter. He had a trade. He learned. He worked. He did things on the side. Did you know the Apostle Paul worked as a tent maker? Isn't that cool? So what he was doing in the Bible was awesome, but it was in addition to other things that he was doing. He was working for some of those things. As a man, Jesus worked. Then when it came for time to him to start his ministry, he also worked. When Jesus was out about doing those things, he traveled, he got tired, he had to withdraw for prayer and rest. There was a balance to Jesus' life. Because for him, just like the rest of us, what he was working at tired him. I even think about the cross and what kind of a special work that was. Like we talk about Jesus' mission to come, live, die, and then raise to life in order to save us. Do you not think that was work? Have you ever thought about it in that context before? Like, when you're going to have a bad day the next day at work, and you got that anxiety feeling, like you can't really be free from work, right? You can't really be free from it all. Jesus knew what was going to happen to him. He knew the work, the ultimate work that he was coming to do. He had to go to the cross. He had to work through emotions. He had to work through temptations. He had to work through facing accusers. He had to work through the pain that he was in and the pain that others were going through. And constantly, he was human, constantly pushed down the idea that he could save himself, constantly pushed down the idea that this stinks and I shouldn't have to go through this because it's their problem and not mine, right? He constantly had to work through some of those things. Christian, do you not realize that while you sit here this morning, that the Spirit of God is at work in you? Have you ever thought about that? Like we're in here, and the Bible talks about one God, one Spirit for all of us. So the Spirit that's in me is in you. If you've accepted Christ as your Lord and Savior, the Spirit is at work in you. So the same Spirit that is prompting words and has helped me prepare all week long is in you, helping you listen and to receive some of these words. And sometimes when I touch a nerve, that's the Spirit tickling you on the inside going, hey, you need to pay attention to this. Right? Maybe it doesn't feel like a tickle. Maybe it feels like a knife. I don't know. I hope it doesn't. That's conviction. The Spirit is at work inside of you and me as I speak to you. Jesus right now is at work pleading your innocence before God. He is a mediator between God and man. He is pleading your innocence to God. And God is at work making great things out of pain and suffering. All three of these things draw your attention and stir up your affections toward God, I hope. That God is not just sitting up there being like, well, I set this thing into motion, let's see what happens. He's at work. He could, right now, like reach down with his amazingly massive hands probably and touch you on the head and take away everything that you're facing and make you holy if he wanted to. There's a reason why you're facing what you're facing. There's a reason why you think the way you think. There's a reason why you've had the experiences that you've experienced. He hasn't taken it away because there is not shortcuts through pain and suffering and the work that can bring. All of the Trinity is working selflessly on your behalf, not because they made a mistake, but because we did. So while God offers us an incredible grace and sacrifices of himself for our good, there are ways that we steal. There are ways that we're actually working against the very attitude that God is trying to instill in us. And quite simply, theft is the opposite of grace. If you really think about it, theft is the opposite of grace. Any kind of stealing is the exact opposite of grace. Listen, this is important. Stealing is the opposite of grace. So grace seeks to give at my expense, where theft seeks to gain at your expense. Does that make sense? Theft is the antithesis or whatever, the other thing that grace. It's opposite. What does Satan do? He comes to steal, kill, and destroy. It is the opposite of grace. And so when we see theft taking place, we should be appalled. This is not what God has designed. This is the exact opposite of what God has designed. When we see that temptation rise up in us, it is a get behind me, Satan moment, because this is the opposite of what God wants for me in my life. Theft forces others to sacrifice for our self-centered interests. This is why it is so destructive, so dangerous, it should be so appalling. So Paul teaches us then to take up the same example that Jesus has given us. He says, let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need. Our mindset is often work to live, isn't it? Work paycheck to paycheck. Let's just work, pay the bills, work, pay the bills, work, pay the bills, and enjoy whatever we can while we're doing that, right? Well, Paul says, but I would contend that the message of Jesus is what Paul is saying here in Ephesians, is God's example for us is that we not simply work to live, but that we actually work to give. Not just working to live, but working to give. Say that, work to give. That's important. I think that's what we're here to do. If you're retired, you're still responsible to work to give. All right? I think that all of our lives, we are self-sacrificing and giving grace and giving things and being generous and working for those things. It doesn't matter that you have done, you're set and you're able to live now. We're here to work to give in order to self-sacrifice and extend grace to others. Paul says instead of working the system and stealing from others, forcing them to sacrifice for you, you do what you see us doing. He says you do what you saw Jesus do, and that's work to give. Ease the burden off others by first providing for yourself. 2 Thessalonians 3:10 gives us this principle. If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. Personal responsibility, right? If you're not going to work, you're not going to eat. Now, notice that it's saying willing. Obviously, there are those of you who can't work, right? We have those people in our society. If they're not represented in this room, they're out there. They can't work, right? It might be a mental, physical, emotional, whatever it is. There's a problem. That's not what Paul is saying here, is that they should go uncared for. He's saying if anyone is not willing to work, doesn't matter how nice they are, it doesn't matter how much bad luck they've had, what the circumstances are, if they are not willing to work, let them feel the weight of that decision. Let them feel the weight of that decision. That's an easy concept for most of us. If someone can't work, then someone else not working to provide for them, then they can help someone who's in need, right? But if you adopt this mindset of working to give, then you'll be able to freely, without obligation, with whatever you have, meet the needs of those who are less fortunate, those who are down on their luck, so to speak, those who are working hard but got tripped up and need a boost getting back in the race. If I design my life in a way that I am working to give, I'm no longer trying to spend all of my paycheck on what I got, right? I'm no longer trying to spend all of my resources on just building my kingdom and doing whatever it is. If I am working to give, that means both, don't miss the double meaning here, working as in gaining resources, working and building those things, but also working to be more generous, like changing my attitude, working on myself so that I am disconnected from materialism in this world. If I am working to give, then I can give to others and help ease their burden and increase my witness of who Jesus is. Isn't that the image of grace? That God in His glorious mercy gave us a gift. He gave us His Son not because He felt like He had to or because He was obligated in some way, but He had an opportunity to rescue us, and out of love, out of what He had, out of His hard work, He gave us Jesus who would stand in our place in death so that we could be raised to life. He sacrificed so that we could gain. He worked to make our mistake right. He worked to give us freedom. And I want to ask you today, what are you doing with that freedom that you've been given? What are you doing with the God-given freedom that you have? Not just the freedom of the nation, but the freedom that God has set you free from sin. What are you doing with it? Because you are free to choose what you will do with your life. That's a glorious gift from God. He's given you free will. He's given you an opportunity to pursue whatever interests that you want to pursue. But you are also responsible for the decisions that you make in freedom. If you decide to build your own personal kingdom, if you decide to continue to walk in old habits and in stinky clothes, then you will reap the reward for that. But if you decide to follow Jesus with every day, every moment, every breath, taking off the old and putting on the new, then just the same, you will reap that reward. It's your decision. I would encourage you this week to reflect on the choices that you're making with your time, with your money, with your hearts, with your attitudes. Are you being generous? Are you helping people are you self-sacrificing so other people can gain? Or are we being self-centered and taking from other people so that they have to lose? Because that in and of itself is a form of theft. So I want to ask you to pray that God would unveil where you might be stealing in your life, where you might be like Adam and Eve, where you might need more generosity and cut ties with your old self and embrace a lifestyle of true grace that drives out connection to this world and to materialism. To have a freedom that says, I've decided to follow Jesus.